Hello. Today I'm going to show you how you can leverage variants in ReScript to give meaning to data that's represented by a primitive like an int or a float or a string, but where you know that the space that this int or float or string is in is actually constrained. So if you have a look here, you can see that we have a date set up. I've just set it to some random date here. And whenever I change stuff, you can see that things will be logged down here. So keep an eye out there for whenever we change things. So what we are going to do is we are going to write a function that takes the day, the current day, or the day from a date, and tells us whether that is the weekend or not. So we have our date here, and a date has a getDay function. And if we log that out, you can see it logs out 4 for this one. If we hover over this, we can see that the date function returns the day of the week of a given date according to local time. 0 is Sunday, 1 is Monday, blah, 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 6 is Saturday. So that means that 4 should be Thursday, right? Excellent. So we can write a function already that tells us whether this day is the weekend or not. And if we look at this, you can see that this is actually represented as an int. So if we write the function here, weekend, the day, switch on the day, and say that, what was it, like 0 is Sunday, and 6 is Saturday. So if it's 0 or if it's 6, then it's the weekend. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, then it's not the weekend. So this should be enough, right? So let's save this and let it compile, and we can see right away that ReScript complains that there's something wrong. And if we hover what this says, it's that you forgot to handle a possible case here, for example, 7. And this means that while we know that what can come back from this function is an integer that's either 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 up to 6. ReScript doesn't know that. It's just an integer to ReScript. So ReScript forces you to handle all possible cases at all times. So it needs you to handle when you pass something in here that isn't an integer in this interval. And if you think about it, that does make sense because this function takes an int and returns a bool. It doesn't take an int that's between 0 and 6 and returns a bool because there's no type for that. So in order to make this work, we can just add a default case here and say that any other day that we pass in is probably not the weekend. Excellent. And if we have a look at the compiled JavaScript out here to the right, you can see that it compiles down to a pretty interesting function here, but that does what it's supposed to do. So if we go ahead here and log whether this is the weekend, the day we have, then we'll see that no, this isn't the weekend. So, but this isn't very ergonomic. What would be good would be to be able to use a variant, like type day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. This would be much, much easier to work with, right? We have all of the days here. If we use this new type to create a day, oops, can't spell, day equals Monday, for instance. You can see that what this compiles to is a string of Monday. And that's good. But that means that we can't really slap on this variant directly onto these numbers right away because it's represented as a string and these are represented as ints. And what we want to do eventually is we want to add our own function to date that instead of returning an integer, which has an interval but that's not really encoded into the type, we want to return this variant instead. So right away you can work on the weekday names instead of working on the integer types. Luckily, there's a way to change the runtime encoding of variants in ReScript, so we can do this. If we just save this, you can see that it changed to day from variant equals 0. So that's nice. So even though we're interacting with it as the name Monday here, the variant constructor, what it actually is in runtime is a 0. And this is going to be very important, as I'm going to show you right away. I'm just going to finish up these. Go. So now this variant is represented as these numbers instead. But we forgot one interesting thing here, and that is that Monday isn't 0, Monday is 1. So we're going to have to shift all of these so they map onto the right types. So we know that this is 1. There we go. Now instead you can see that Monday is actually 1, which is correct here. So if we were to write this this function instead, isWeekend, but we'd write it with this variant, it'll look like this. See here. See. This looks much nicer, right? It's easy to read. You go into here, you have a look at isWeekend, okay. If it's Saturday, if it's Sunday, then it's the weekend. If it's any other day, then it's not the weekend. And there's a couple of things to notice here. First, let's look at the compiled JavaScript. This function still operates on the integers, but since we've constrained the space of possible integers for ReScript, it knows now through that this function can only take this variant, and this variant only has this representation, so it's indeed an integer between 0 and 6. It can clean up the code a lot because it knows that we can just match on 6 or 0, which represents Saturday or Sunday. And if those are the case, then it's true. Otherwise, it's false. So right away, we see that the generated code is much nicer because we constrain the possible space. So that is good. And it's also much easier to read, obviously, because we're working with actual names that mean something. So instead of looking here like, oh, 0 or 6, okay, what was that again? Let's go here and look. Okay, it's 0 is Sunday, 6 is Saturday, perfect. Instead of having to map this into in our heads itself, we encode this into the type system, and we can just work with the regular names here, which is much, much easier, obviously, and much easier to say. So now we have a function that instead of taking an integer, takes our new variant day. This function is more efficient, obviously, and it's more intuitive. But there's one final thing missing. How can we pass the day we get in here into our new function? Because if we do this, remember that we have a variable now called day. If we try to log this out, the weekend day, then it's going to complain that this is an integer, but it's expecting a day. So what we can do here is we can extend the built-in date module with our own function. So remember that we have a Date.getDay. I want a function called getTypedDay. And we can define that as a function that operates on dates and just works the same way as the regular one. See that this one down here, up here, sorry, getDay, it operates on the regular date, and it just calls the API that you'd expect, getDay. We can make our own thing that also calls that same API, because that's what we want to call at runtime, but that gives back the value as the typed value of day. So let's write an external for that. External getDay typed. We say that this takes a date.t because that's what it operates on, and it returns a day. And the function is called getDay. Now we're going to have to add a send annotation here. I'm not going to cover exactly what this is and how it works. I'm going to cover that in separate videos. Just know that this roughly means that what you're saying is that I want this function to be called on whatever object I'm passing in first here. So I want getDay to get called on date. But don't worry about that now. So date typed. We have our date up here. Remember, it's a date.t. We can take date and we can call getDay typed. See, this compiles to just the same thing as the regular getDay function does. getDay. And if we log this out, day typed, you can see that it still logs a 4. So it's still that. But if we hover it, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So just to make this point very clear, we can go ahead and switch over day typed here and saying that if it's maybe it's funnier to do the actual day that it is. Just go ahead and make this option units and then Thursday. It's Thursday. See, it logs it because it knows that if day typed equals 4, sets it Thursday. But we have our nice switch here. Just clean it up a little bit here. So it's much easier to work with data in this way rather than the other way around. And if we apply this finally to our isWeekend function, we can now pass in day typed. And let's say that no, it's not the weekend because it's Thursday. So this is a technique for working with data that you know is kind of constrained. This is fairly common in JavaScript APIs that they return an integer or a string or a float or something, but it's kind of a constrained space. So you know beforehand what values it can assume. So this is a nice technique to kind of make things easier to work with and let ReScript also optimize the code you're writing much more when it knows the entire space here. And it's also more intuitive, of course, to work with these things that actually have meaning, the constructors, rather than working with an integer, which you have to translate yourself in the head. But there's also one thing that I want to show that's left, and that is, now say that you have day typed, that's what you're working with. Maybe there's another API that you can't control which needs the day as an integer anyway. Luckily, there's a way in ReScript of coercing this typed variant into its underlying primitive. So because we have all of these as the annotations here that tells us that all of the constructors of this type is an integer at runtime. Doesn't matter which integer, just that it's an integer. We can do this. Day as int. Day typed. Coerce it back to int. Okay, so this is the coercion operator. It takes a value and then tries to coerce it into a type. And this works in cases where the runtime representation is the same and a few others. We're also going to cover the coercion operator in a separate video. But now, day as typed, we have this typed as the constructor, the variant. And then day as int, it's now an int again. So if we log this out, it's just the same thing as it was before. Exactly, it logs as 4. But we derived it from day typed. So that's a little bit about how you can use variants to make working with APIs where you know the possible values it can assume much more convenient and nicer. I show this with integers, but this works with strings and it works with a bunch of other things as well that I'm going to show in other videos. This is a really useful technique. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and learned something. Please let me know what you think in the comments and have a nice day.